Hey class, this is it. This is the final session of our current module, the greatest story ever, the Gospels Visited. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be in class with you all. Thank you so much for joining me in this journey. And I do want to remind you, however, even though this is the last session of this module, we are far from over. We have just begun going through and mining the depths of the greatest story ever together. And we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, starting even just next Sunday. So I hope and pray that as many of you as possible can join us as we continue in this journey. If not, I totally understand. No hard feelings at all. If there's another class that you feel will bring you close to God, I want everyone to take, any of those classes that are calling out to you, that are speaking to you. But I will also say that this has been an incredible time, an incredible 6 weeks of being able to go through the Gospel of Mark with you guys. But we've only just begun. This is my pitch to you to stay with us and to continue on with us. I mean, we have not even begun yet to mine the depths and the riches and the deep meaning that is going to emerge out of this greatest story ever. So I pray that you'll be able to join us. And if you need to sign up, you can sign up on the app right now. You can look at the spring courses, I believe it's called, and find the greatest story ever and sign up for the next class if you wish to join us. Okay, so for today, though, we're going to wrap up with Mark 14 through 16. This is a very deep, very rich, very incredible a few chapters for us. And again, what an amazing, incredible blessing that we get to study these on Easter Sunday. So praise God for making it work out that way. Okay, let's start in Mark 14. So there's three things that I want us to talk about in Mark 14. There's lots of important stuff, but three main points. Number one, I want us to talk about the Last Supper. Number two, I want us to talk about the Garden of Gethsemane. And the third thing is the trial of Jesus that I want us to hit. Okay, so let's start in Mark 14. So the thing that we need to know about the Last Supper here in Mark 14 is that the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples, the setting for that was a Passover feast. I don't know how many of you have ever had a Seder meal or participated in a Seder meal. If not, I highly recommend it if you ever get the opportunity to do it. It's really incredible. And what that is a symbolic meal where every element represents and symbolizes some aspect of the story of the Exodus for the people of Israel. Okay? So this is a feast that the Jewish people will have participated in together for literally thousands and thousands of years. Ever since the Exodus itself, they've been participating in this meal together. So, understanding that this is the context of Jesus sharing this meal with his disciples is going to help us understand the statements that Jesus is making with what he's saying and what he's doing at this meal. So, for example, let's just jump in. When Jesus breaks the bread, he says, "This is my body broken for you," here in Mark 14. Now, what is he doing here? Well, there is a line where during the Seder meal, bread would be broken, they would eat unleavened bread, and the person reading the script would say, "This is the bread of our affliction, which our fathers ate in the wilderness." So when Jesus substitutes that line for the line that he says, "This is my body broken for you," he's doing something very, very intentional. This would have been very eye-opening for the disciples, right? What he's saying is, this is the bread of my affliction and my suffering, which just like the Exodus, this is a new Exodus. It will lead my people to a new kind of freedom, because that's what the Exodus was all about, right? God leading his people through Moses to freedom. Okay, then Jesus pours a cup, and he hands cups out of wine, right? And everyone takes the drink. And Jesus says upon the drink, "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many." Okay, now this reference, he is referencing several Old Testament passages here, and we are going to take a second to go back and read through those together. He is referencing, first of all, Jeremiah 31. So we're going to go back to Jeremiah 31. And Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, read, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they will be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more.'" Okay, so what is going on here? So in Jeremiah here, there's a prophecy. And the prophecy says, I know that the old way of connecting God to the people has been through the law and through this covenant that God has made with you. Now, what's the nature of that covenant? We don't have time to explore that fully today, but stay with us, because, we will. We will spend a lot of good time figuring out what is going on with this covenant and with the law. But for now, let's just know that this is the way that people were trying to connect to God, through the law, through the covenant, through the promise that was made. But God is telling them, you broke it. You broke the covenant, right? The covenant should be, for all intents and purposes, completely ended. It should be done. It should be finished. But I'm going to make a new covenant. Even though you broke the old one, I'm going to make a new one with you. And the new one, you're not even going to need the law anymore as a way to connect with me. I'm just going to be in your hearts. I'm going to live inside of I'm going to put my law inside of each of you, in my people. Okay, so this is important because now Jesus has come and Jesus is the way. Jesus is the way that God lives within all of us. So he's coming to fulfill this prophecy in Jeremiah. Okay, let's move to the next one. Zechariah 9:11 reads, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit." Okay, so again, this idea of freedom, that the new covenant sets God's people free. And that is what Jesus has come to do. Now let's go to Isaiah 53. So thus far, we've gotten two different verses that are telling us about what this new covenant. When Jesus says the new covenant, people know exactly what he's referencing, these Old Testament verses where God has promised a new covenant. But now, let's see, when he says poured out for many, I poured it out for the many. Let's see what that's referencing here in Isaiah 53, verse 12. "Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors." Okay, so Jesus is saying that Isaiah has promised that when the Messiah comes, he will bear the sins and he will pour out his blood for the many, for everyone. And Jesus is saying, this is me. I have come to do that. And he's giving us a picture, right, of the cross. And this is what's incredible. This is what's important for us. To realize that the references Jesus is making, the whole point of the meal, the Passover feast, was to look backward, to look at the past. And Jesus is saying, let's do that. Let's look and see how God saved his people, Israel, in the Exodus with the Passover. But let's look forward. Let's also realize that all of that, everything in the past was actually pointing you here and now and what I am going to do in the future, which is going to the cross and eventually, as we'll see, be resurrected to new life. Okay, so there's one more thing though. There's something missing from the feast. If you have partaken in the feast as it normally is set up, then what you would do next is you would eat a main course. And the main course was always lamb. But we read through here in Mark, and there's no main course. Where's the main course in Mark? It's not here. Did Jesus forget? Did he forget one of the most important parts of the Passover feast? Were they too poor to be able to afford it? No. What's going on here? Jesus has intentionally not brought a lamb for them to eat because he is saying, I am the lamb. And the lamb that they would eat in this Passover feast is hearkening all the way back to the Passover itself, right? When lambs were sacrificed and the blood was painted on the doors during the Passover so that the angel of God would pass over those houses and the people that were living there would be spared and would not be killed. So Jesus is saying, this is me. I am the Passover lamb sacrificed for you so that your lives will be spared. This is incredible. This is amazing stuff, right? Jesus is making so many deep, rich connections here to the Old Testament, just a few lines of text here in Mark 14. Okay, but let's keep going. We got to move, and let's get to the Garden of Gethsemane. So Jesus says, okay, it's time now. The feast is over, and it's time for us to get going on our mission. So they go to the garden, and Jesus is so greatly distressed. It says that he's sweating blood out of his pores, right? Sometimes you might see paintings of Jesus in the garden, and he kind of has this serene look, and he's looking up to heaven like, yes, isn't this wonderful that I'm about to go to the cross? No, that is absolutely not what we see here. Jesus is under such distress. He is suffering already. He is looking forward at the pain and the suffering that he's about to experience on the cross, and it is overwhelming to him. And then we see the first failure of the disciples, right? Jesus asked them to stay awake. He says, stay awake and pray with me as I go to pray. And he finds them asleep. And this is a very interesting part because Jesus tells them, he says, won't you please stay awake because the heart is willing, but the flesh is weak, he says. And I often thought of this, that Jesus was telling them, he was kind of admonishing them, saying like, yeah, your flesh is weak. But I think actually what he's doing here is he's telling them, this is my moment, guys. This is do or die. If I'm going to go through with this and take on the weight of the entire world's sin upon myself and die for the sake of every person ever, it's now. I must do it now. I need your prayer. I need your prayer to make the right decision, right? We have to remember that Jesus was fully God, but also fully human. And he was subject to everything that humans experience. And certainly he was going through so much in this incredible time. Okay, so that's important for us. Then here come the soldiers, and they're ready for a battle. They've brought like 100 soldiers. They're all armed, and Jesus is just here with a few guys, with a few of his disciples here in this garden. And they come up and they arrest him. And Peter, Mark doesn't tell us it's Peter, but John tells us that it's Peter, pulls out a sword and strikes, right? And gets one of the servants or one of the soldiers in the ear. And one of the Gospels says it cuts his ear all the way off. And Jesus says, no, put away the swords. He heals the ear, and he tells them, this is not the way. This is not what God intends. This is not God's kingdom and how we come into it. We do not take it by force. We do not use violence. It's a way of peace, and it's a way of sacrificial love. And Jesus has been trying to teach us that, right, throughout this entire story, throughout the entire Gospel of Mark. And here we get one last plea from Jesus to say, it's not about violence. It's about peace. Then we get Peter's denial of Jesus. And Peter's denial of Jesus, I think, connects very, very similarly to the disciples not being able to stay awake with him in the garden. And what I think is important here is that the disciples and Peter's failure here in this chapter represent both Israel's failure, because as we are going to go back and read, Israel fails time and time and time again. It's going to be just a whole story of failure on the part of God's chosen people. And it's no different now as Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross. We still see God's people failing him. Even the people that Jesus handpicked to be his followers are failing him. But Jesus came to redeem even that failure. Right? This is so important. Not only is Jesus staying true to his mission of going to the cross, but this is the very reason he's going to the cross, because he knew this failure would happen, right? He knows that our failure will happen today, right now, as of this very moment. I am certainly failing in some way to live up to the standards that God has desired for me and who he created me to be. But Jesus came to redeem even that. And that is, I think, a critical, important message for us to cling to here today on this Easter Sunday. Okay, so now we get a trial. They take him and they put him to a trial. And it's kind of a sham, right? This trial, they're trying to make up stuff. They're finding any reason that they possibly can to hold him and find him guilty and get him crucified if at all possible. And Jesus says something that really turns the tide of this trial. He says here in, I'm in verse 62, Mark 14:62. And Jesus said, so the question that they asked was, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. As soon as Jesus says this turns from a trial into absolute chaos and a riot. People are tearing their clothes. There's fist fights breaking out. People are running up to slap and spit on Jesus. It's mayhem, right? Why would people go so crazy over one little statement that Jesus made? Well, two things. Number one, when Jesus says the words I am, he is saying I am God. Because the Hebrew for I am is the name that God gave to Moses when Moses said, who should I say is sending me to the people to save them? And God says, tell them I am sent you. I am who I am. Or the Hebrew sometimes actually might lead us to interpret that, I am being who I am being. But Jesus is clearly referencing this. He is using the name of God, Yahweh, in his answer. Yes, I am. And he is also referencing a couple of more scriptures from the Old Testament. Let's look at Daniel 7:13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Whoa. And then also Psalm 110, verse 1, which says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool. Okay, so two things that are going on here. Number one, when it says comes on a cloud, it's not like a cloud like the clouds that we see up in our atmosphere in the sky. Okay, this is a cloud reference like the cloud that led the people through the desert in the wilderness. God, right? It's a cloud that contains the very glory of God himself. So Jesus is coming on that kind of cloud, and he's coming to sit at the right hand. What do people who sit at the right hand get to do? They get to judge. And Jesus is going to be coming to judge the enemies of God who will be put at the footstool of God. Now, who is he referencing here? Pretty clearly the people that are in the room with him, right? The religious leaders. He is saying, you are actually the enemies of God, and God will bring me back to judge you. You're judging me right now. You're putting me on trial, but look out, because the final judgment is God's, and I get to come and I wield that judgment against the enemies of God. Whoa. Pandemonium, chaos, people going crazy. Very, very critical, though, part of Scripture here, and to see exactly why Jesus drove the religious leaders so crazy and why they wanted to kill him. Okay, as we move into Mark 15 here, we see that the religious leaders switch their claims to political ones in order to appeal to Rome. So, what is going on? Originally, in the trial of Jesus, they're accusing him of blasphemy. But when they come to talk to Pilate, they realize Pilate's not going to care about blasphemy. So what are they going to do? They accuse him of being king of the Jews, which is a very different kind of term and is the kind of term that might reference a political revolutionary. And so that's what they try to do. Now, the back and forth between Jesus and Pilate is very interesting, very intriguing. Mark does not go very, very deep into that back and forth, not as much as some of the other gospel authors like John, for example. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that one on pause. I want us to really delve into the depth of this back and forth because it's very interesting between Jesus and Pilate. But we're going to do that when we come back through the Gospels revisited. And so I'm looking forward to doing that with you guys. Okay, so now we have Jesus getting put on the cross. He's being killed. And Jesus quotes Psalm 22 on the cross. And we will not have time to read all the way through Psalm 22 right now. But let me kind of summarize it for you. It starts with the famous line, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or sometimes it's translated, why have you abandoned me? And this is true, and I think we must embrace that Jesus is intentionally referencing this psalm, and he speaks these words because on the cross, Jesus has been momentarily abandoned by God to the curse, to the penalty of sin. Even though Jesus himself was sinless, he was taking on the sin of the world on himself in this moment on the cross. But if we continue to read Psalm 22, it doesn't stay with this pain and this suffering. In fact, David gets to a moment where he's declaring victory, God's victory, that God will actually save him from his enemies. So this is important because the cross is not just a moment of Jesus suffering and taking on the sin of the world. It is that, but it's also the means through which God is achieving victory over sin and over death forever. And Psalm 22 gives us a clear vision and a forecast that is exactly what's going on. And there's just total victory in it, right? It's not going to be permanent. God has not permanently abandoned Jesus or forsaken him. He will come and he will lift him up and put him at his own right hand, just as Jesus has referenced in this very chapter. Okay, the last thing I want to do is, I told you a while back that we would go over some evidence that the resurrection is proven to be true. And I wanted to go ahead and do that before we finish here with this section that culminates with the incredible climax of the resurrection. Okay, how do we know that the resurrection is a valid thing? How can we put our trust that the resurrection really happened? Number one, There were multiple eyewitnesses, way more eyewitnesses than are needed to be admissible in court at the time. However, the very first people who were eyewitnesses of a resurrected, risen Jesus were what kind of people? They were women. And guess what? Women's testimony was actually inadmissible in court. Women were so lowly thought of by the culture and the time that they would not have accepted their testimony. This is crazy, right? If the disciples were going to make up this story, this is not what they would do. They would not have women be the first ones to see. I think that's really important for us as we think through this story. Now, the second point that I want to make is the aftermath. That there were dozens and dozens of messianic movements throughout this time in history. Lots of people claimed to be messiahs. And every time they were captured, they were killed. And what happened afterward? Those movements died out. But not this one. This one exploded. And that's really important for us. And then number 3, the ultimate message of the kingdom is what? That you give up power, you become a servant, and you die on a cross like Jesus. This is the message of a movement to take over the world? Either one of two things is true. Either these people are completely insane if this is what they would make up a story and ask people to follow, or the story is absolutely true. Now, as we leave today, I want us to keep in mind that because of the cross, because of Jesus' resurrection, everything is different. The whole world has changed if this story is true, and I absolutely believe that it is, and I hope you do too. And we're going to spend the next several